Welcome to the Daily Objective. So famously, Ayn Rand, when she was asked what are her three favorite theatrical plays, she said Cyrano de Bergerac, Cyrano de Bergerac, Cyrano de Bergerac. So probably if you've been around objective circles, you've heard about the appreciation for the play and how many people said that they find it inspiring, an example of romantic literature. So we have together today with us Lisa VanDamme, founder of VanDamme Academy, also host of a parenting show in Ayn Rand Center UK channel. She also has the Reading With Me app, which if you've always wanted to start jumping into serious literature, but you didn't know where to start, it's definitely the place to start. So you're gonna see that when Lisa talks about literature, it's inspiring and you will want to be part of this. Enough with introduction. So Lisa, you're here with us today because there's a new Cyrano movie. It went to cinemas in 2021. It's featuring Peter Dinklage. Most people know him from Game of Thrones. So I think you went there and watched it with your students, I think, right, of VanDamme Academy. So the point today is tell us what's your take on it, but also maybe discuss about Cyrano a bit more, why so many objectives like it, what are its characteristics as romantic literature that one might find appealing. So the floor is yours.
Okay, so I also teach literature currently to 7th and 8th grade at VanDamme Academy, and Cyrano de Bergerac is a play I've been teaching every year for at least a decade, maybe as many as 20 years. I'm losing track now. So it is a play that's very near and dear to my heart. So much so that it's one of the few plays that I've read and felt like I actually fell in love with the protagonist in reading it. I mean, felt like I was closing the cover and closing off a world that belonged to me. And also a couple of years ago, that love has expanded beyond Cyrano de Bergerac to Rostand, the author in general, and his work. And I even went on a sort of literary pilgrimage myself 2 years ago. I read a biography of him and learned that his home was still there in the Basque region of France and open to tourists. So I flew to France by myself and found a little place to stay nearby and spent 3 days exploring every corner of his home. So Rostand is one of my great loves. Cyrano de Bergerac is one of my great loves. And I have to confess that from the outset before I start talking about the movie, because I did take my students, every year I get my students to fall in love with it too. I took them to see the movie. And we had about 2 hours of animated conversation afterward where they were expressing their displeasure with it. So your students had already read the play? Yes.
And then there was a movie. Okay.
Yeah, we read the play a few months ago and we saw that the movie was coming out. So we were kind of waiting on the edge of our seats so that we could go take a school field trip there, and did just last week. And so kind of tried to go in neutral, but did have the impression from the trailer that we were not going to be pleased with it. And that is how it turned out to be. But when I told them that I was going to come here and have this discussion, my students said to me, now, Miss VanDamme, just remember, if somebody goes into this movie not having read the play, they might enjoy it, and they might not feel the same indignation that you do because of your attachment to the play. So I do have to give that as a disclaimer from the outset, that somebody just going cold into this movie might think it was all right. I mean, I still think it has major weaknesses, even apart from its comparison to the original. But I do want to give that disclaimer before I start talking about what I hated about it.
So just to give a very general overview to the audience, first of all, I haven't watched the movie. I've watched the 1950 classical Cyrano film. Yes. But from watching the trailer, it looks like it follows this trend where the characters become more diverse. So Christian, for example, is a person of color. I don't assume that this was in the original. And Cyrano, instead of having a big nose, is someone who is very, 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 very short. So, and also it's a musical, which I don't know how often Cyrano is transferred to a play which is a musical? Was it something unique?
So this was a stage play. They turned it into a musical for the Broadway stage. And then Joe Wright, the director, who I love for Pride and Prejudice, he turned the stage play into a movie. So I'm trying to not hold him completely accountable for the disaster of it, because he was working with the stage play, though he should have gone to the original to get his real inspiration. So yeah, the diversity of casting. So yes, they changed it from, instead of him having a large nose, instead he's a man of short stature. I was willing to accept that. I do see a problem in it, and the problem that I see in it goes to the heart of my basic complaint with this film. I believe, so the film turned the story into a story of somebody with an insecurity, kind of crippled by an insecurity that undermined his ability to live a happy life. Now, that's kind of a cliche, kind of a trope. I don't think that's what the original was about at all. In fact, I think the choice of making him have an exceptionally large nose, although this is also loosely based on a character who existed in reality, apparently, but the idea, the symbolic idea that I think is that he is a man who is larger than life in every respect. He is a superhero. He's a giant. He's a person of epic proportions and epic idealism and total romanticism. So he's too great for this world of conventionality and compromise. And so the visual, symbol of the big nose is just indicating that, yeah, he's a man of exaggerated proportions. So it's a little funny, that we've got now a person of short stature to play the man of exaggerated proportions. But I think the thing that I still think you could pull that off, but you have to be on the premise that is the character that Cyrano is, not somebody who fails in love because he was too prideful and insecure, but somebody who fails in love because he's too great for the world, and the world can't offer him the values that he needs and deserves.
2 comments on this. Let me pause you for 2 comments. So the first one is just so people understand what type of larger than life character we're talking about. And it's not a spoiler because it's the first scene. So Cyrano goes to a theater and he has beef with an actor.
Yeah.
We find out not only because he's a bad actor, but for a more serious reason. So he basically says, you leave the stage, otherwise we're going to fight. And if anyone has a problem, come talk to me. So of course, no one dares to, because they know he's an excellent sportsman. But then the owner of the theater shows up and says, hey, look, I'm losing business here. So Cyrano takes a bunch of money and throws it to him and says, look, no problem, take that money. But very soon we realized that this was all the money he had.
Yes.
So a friend says to him, what a mad act to throw away all your money. But what a gesture, Cyrano says. So this is the type of person he is. This is the type of larger than life character he is. But let me push you a bit on this idea of the insecurity. Doesn't Cyrano even in the original have insecurity? Because the reason he doesn't go to talk to his crush is because he thinks, I'm too ugly. She's not going to like me.
Yeah. So I want to comment on the first thing first, and then I'll get to that. Also, I want to give a little plug that my discussion of this play is in the Read With Me app. I did Cyrano de Bergerac. I read it myself, which was a great joy to be able to speak those words. And all my commentary is in there. And one of my last posts is Cyrano insecure? One of my last pieces of commentary on it. So first, yes, that introduction of Cyrano, that appearance, which if you see it in the theaters, he's appearing from the back of the back of the audience for a staged play. So what they'll often do is have him appear from the back of the audience, of the real audience, and it's such a dramatic moment. So he appears, he tells this lamentable actor that he's banned him from the stage. the people get upset. He challenges the entire audience to a duel. There are so many lines of incredibly brilliant swagger, like, will all those who wish to die, please raise your hands. He's got this prowess as a swordsman. He's got this incredible swagger. He can challenge a whole room to a duel and nobody will dare fight him, even though they've got a whole crowd and he's one man. Yes, he says farewell paternal pension, gives him all of the money he has to close down the play without harming the theater. And yeah, the line in the original play, and the translation I use at school, it's the Hooker translation. He says his friend, who always wants him to look out for himself and compromise and be his friend Lebray, just, do what you need to do to be successful. You're so wonderful. I want you to experience joy and pleasure in life. And he says to him, what a fool you are. And he says, no, but what a gesture. So that is, he's just this magnificent, heroic, larger than life character. In the film, oh gosh, there's so many things I want to say about it. But first of all, somebody challenges him to a duel. He fights them. This is part of his other swagger, is he's a poet. He has this incredible facility with words. So he's physically superhuman. He's mentally superhuman. He's poetic and romantic and, able to express himself in the most romantic of language. And he fights a duel. He says, okay, while we fight, I'll compose a ballade, which is a very structured form of poetry. And he says, and on the final verse, I'll thrust home. So he's going to time all the movements to the words he's saying in this highly structured poem. So in the movie, he fights a duel with this bizarrely cartoonish villain. And it's his rap that he sort of sings as he's fighting him is about what it's like to have the nurse be horrified by you when you're born. It's all stressing the kind of trauma and insecurity of being, different from other people. So it just undercuts his character profoundly right from the start. Now, is he insecure? This is like my number one argument that I have with people. And usually what I ask people to try to get them to see it from my perspective is, when you step away from this play and just look at him, do you look like this is an incredible, superhuman, great figure? Or do you feel any pity or sympathy for him? And there's, to me, what we're supposed to walk away with is total hero worship in every respect. Sadness that he is too great for the world and the world can't reward, the way the world is. He won't be rewarded for his greatness, but just pure greatness. But so what I think is that it's not an insecurity with himself. I think when he has that duel, and there's a line early on where he says, know that I glory in this nose of mine. I don't think that's a front. I don't think he's just trying to pretend. I think he actually does. I think he thinks by his own standards, he's a handsome man. So I think the insecurity is with the world. It's not insecurity in himself. It's insecurity that the world will reward him for his virtues, because it won't. It's a fact that it won't. And it's not just in the realm of love. The film makes this all about romance. It's in the realm of work. Molière steals his lines and his play. Yeah. It's in every respect. He loses out on material, practical success because of his complete devotion to his ideals.
And also, someone who is insecure is hiding it.
Mm-hmm.
When someone makes fun of his nose, he says, oh, your nose is too large. Is this all you have? And he has something like 10 wittier insults about his nose. But he's like, absolutely, I can make fun of my nose. You can make fun of my nose. And that's why they have a fight. Let's see some first super chat. So thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Regina. Robert says, And thank you for the superstar, Robert. Lisa, thank you and your class for taking one for the team. I don't care to see a Cyrano musical, nor do I want to see the characters, quote, reimagined. But given Mr. Dinklage's talent, I've been curious.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about that. So first of all, when I heard that this new movie was going to be made, a lot of people said to me, oh, but it's Peter Dinklage. He's such a phenomenal actor, so it has to be good. And I had never, my only exposure to Peter Dinklage had been in the movie Elf. It's like a comedic Christmas movie. So I just didn't know what anyone was talking about. Turns out it was Game of Thrones. I didn't realize it was like this universal thing that everybody knows he's a great actor, but I'd never seen an episode of Game of Thrones. So I just had no idea what they were referring to. Now, he is a great actor, and much of the acting in the movie, I think, is great. And I almost wish it wasn't. I think it's worse that it's great acting. And I think that this is something I'm starting to observe in films more and more, is that they're substituting acting for script. So it's acting instead of plot. It's emoting instead of content. And there are so many great actors out there who are exceptionally effective at that. They can say anything, and they do it with a dramatic, allure that sucks you in. But what I call it smoke and mirrors. You are, it's almost like you're drawn in emotionally, and your brain is kind of blanked out as you are, because you're just focused on the acting itself. So I think that's a lot of what was going on here, is that there was some very good acting, but it wasn't acting that's bringing out this sublime theme in the original work. It was acting per se. And that's starting to bother me more and more in films. I don't want to hear about great acting. I want to hear about a great plot, well realized by the actors.
And an obvious example that we discussed in a previous episode, the viewers will recognize, is the film Don't Look Up. So Leonardo DiCaprio does some great acting because he's one of the greatest actors of our generation, but the film is unwatchable. And in a way, he saves it from being a B movie or a caricature of a B movie as it should be. And as you said, in a way, you wish the acting was not great. Okay, but
can I give a contrast to that? I want to give a contrast to that. One of my personal favorite movies is Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood. And I hear it was made with, I think a lot of the people in it weren't even professional actors. And it's kind of low budget production. So a lot of people I know who are film buffs don't love that movie, in part because they're evaluating in terms of those film characteristics, cinematography or acting, or but as a plot-driven movie, it is just genius. So I'd give me plot over acting any day.
So tell us then a bit more about the movie, because I'm always tempted to discuss Cyrano itself rather than the movie. So I keep interrupting you when you want to evaluate the movie. So back to you.
Okay. So I in preparation for this, I sat with my students yesterday. We'd already talked about it for hours, but I said, all right, give me your top 10 complaints about the movie. So I've got a list here. I don't know how many we'll get through because we don't have a lot of time, but so the first and most important is what I said, that to me, this is the ultimate play of romanticism. I'm planning to give a talk this summer at OCON called Hugo, Rostand, Ernani, and How to Be a Romantic, because Hugo and Rostand are just, two of the ultimate romantics. So as I said, this play is unique in presenting this incredible superhuman character. And I could tell from the trailer that they were going to turn it into a romantic trope, and they were going to turn it into a kind of fatal flaw story, that he is undermined by his insecurity, and that's the focus of it. So you remember the scene of his death, an incredibly moving scene in the original and the Jose Ferrer version. And one of the elements of it is that he says he's dying, and he says, "Not here, not lying down." and he stands up and he's fighting his ancient enemies. In the movie version, he goes to see Roxanne. They have the scene of him giving her his gazette, and then he falls on the ground and he's dying. And I'm watching this going, oh my God, is he going to die on the ground? Are they just going to have him flat on his back? And that's indeed what happens. And not only that, there's this very, I thought, incredibly awkward scene where he's lying on the ground, kind of twitching in death. And then she starts singing a love song over the top of him. It was very bizarre. But it just made it kind of a Beauty and the Beast story, kind of a, fatal flaw, confession of your fault. In the last line in the original, it depends which translation you read, but in the original French, he says, I go to heaven with one thing unspotted from the world, and that is my panache, is the French version. Sometimes that's what they use in the English version, or in the Hooker version, he says, my white plume, and his white plume means his perfect integrity. He goes to heaven with his integrity entirely intact. In this scene, she kisses him. She says, I loved you all the time. And it was always you I loved. And he says, and I loved my pride. And he dies. And it's like, that was his weakness, is that he was too focused on his own pride and gave up everything. So the whole spirit of the play is dead in that.
So I have to ask you here, though. I have to ask you. So, is this that the director didn't get it? Or is it that they got it? I'm not going to say they wanted to, they don't like Eros, but they said, okay, no one is going to understand this. Let's put it down to the level that the average consumer of my work is going to get something from it. So which of the two you think it was?
I don't know, but I don't know if it matters. I think the same truth is in either version, that there's just culturally, we're just incredibly superficial in our entertainment. So culturally, we just want the familiar. We want it to be pretty and well acted, but there's no demand or capability. Either it's no demand or no capability of creating something that's actually intellectually stimulating, unique, new, creative. There's just so little of that out there. Everything does feel very familiar and conventional, and more like a trope than something new. So somebody didn't understand the spirit of it. I know that. I mean, I guess the problem has to be rooted in the stage play, because if this is just a cinematic production of the stage play, well, then the stage play got it all wrong. So yeah. Should I go on to
complaint number two?
Complaint number two. So the other thing, before we went to see the movie, I asked my students, what will disappoint you if it doesn't include this scene or this element or this quality of the play? What will disappoint you? And one of them said, well, it has to be poetic. If it's not poetic, it's not Cyrano. I mean, the whole point is he's supplying Christian with the ultimate beautiful words. He himself is a poet who can compose poetry while fighting a duel. It's written in this incredibly romantic language, and I'm reading in an English translation. God, I wish I could read the original French. I'm sure it's magically superior. Apparently, Rostand himself was more comfortable writing in verse than he was writing prose, and would even, spontaneously speak in verse sometimes when called upon to do so. So the language is such an important part of it. And so we were sitting in the theater, and I was joking that, if it turns out to be really terrible, I'm going to appear from the back of the movie theater and, do the Cyrano thing, ban it from the stage. And they were laughing, and they said, what's the first line? And I said, wretch, have I not forbade you these 3 weeks? And so we had just laughed about that before the movie started. And then the movie starts. They do have this scene. He does appear from the back of the theater, and he says, what are you doing here? And I could just feel everybody it was just my class in the audience because we went to an 11 o'clock a.m. showing, and I could just feel them all sink. I'm all like,
Sorry,
okay,
how
forget
old are
poetry.
the kids in your class?
What's that? How old are
How
they?
old are...
13, 14. 13, 14. No,
That's
yeah.
impressive. That's impressive.
Oh, that's the least of it. I should get into more stories of the things that they said. Okay, so one of the things that was kind of an awkward go to a movie with your 8th grade teacher aspect of it is that everything was hypersexualized. That's another thing. Like it's another kind of cheap way to capture romance, but we don't know how to present romance in any meaningful sense. So we'll just make it sexy. So. Just for example, in the first, after Roxanne starts receiving the letters from Christian, originally by Cyrano, there's this prolonged scene of her singing and basically rubbing the letters on her half naked body and kind of writhing on the bed and stuff. So that was one of their complaints. They have the sophistication to say, well, that was kind of cheap. That is not the romance that we remember from the play. And then there's this other scene. This is an aside, but it was the most comedic moment of my conversation with them. There's a scene when he meets Roxanne at Ragueneau's shop. And in the movie, Ragueneau's composing poetry. He is a poet in the original. Here he has no character other than that. He's composing poetry and he's writing a poem that involves astronomical metaphors. And Cyrano says to him, no, write about what you know. Make it about baking because that's what you know. And he says, yes, heat, rising bread. So like there's sexual connotations and everything he says. And then there's this musical number where the people in the bakery the men are shirtless and they're all like kneading dough and like caressing each other's arms as they're kneading dough. And it's just, we all found it very weird. And so we come back later, we're talking about that scene and my 14-year-old students start saying, yeah, they need a workplace training seminar over there about red flags to look for. If your coworker is not wearing a shirt, if they start caressing you, and they said, yeah, they need an HR department because Ragueneau was too busy composing poetry in the corner. So yeah, they had a lot of.
Let me ask you a question here, because as I was thinking about it. So, do you think though that? So you said there's this element that there's almost something sexual with the letters.
Yeah.
Let me take it, even if it's not sexual.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't we say today that a woman would find all these letters a bit cheesy? So particularly if it's a man of action, the idea is the man of action doesn't talk too much. So cheesiness in a good way is like a spice. You put a bit in the food. You make it too much, the food becomes unedible. So was this like a 19th century thing, this hyper lyrical, you're the sun and all that stuff, and today it would be weird, or is there something universal there?
If it's a 19th century thing, I want to live in the 19th century. I'm trying to bring the 19th century back in that respect. I think it's funny because I don't think my students find it cheesy, but I think that's because there's no cynicism in my classrooms. I mean, it's just, I think they experience it outside of the school walls, so it's hard to keep it at bay. But I think a world in which you can just uninhibitedly worship and beauty, then it's not cheesy. I mean, it could be cheesy, but but the words of Cyrano, there's nothing cheesy in any of them. So I know what you're talking about, but I feel like it's almost like a collective repression in our culture that they won't allow themselves to enjoy beauty in this way because we've just learned that that's something to be laughed at. It's what I used to call the Simpsons culture. I was never a fan of the Simpsons, even though I know, or South Park, even though I can comprehend their brilliance. But it just set this tone of to be intellectual is to laugh at things, not to be intellectual is to revere, worship, embrace things. So yeah, I think it it's very possible to have that be effective and beautiful.
All right. So before we go to the, you have to pick the top two things that you didn't like, because we don't have time to go to all the 10 points of the list. But also to end on a positive note, something that you liked. And also I'm going to ask you, what is the best way for someone to have their first contact with Cyrano? Which play, which translation? But before that, let me go to some more super chats. So Tom says he loves the discussion. Thank you very much, Tom. Love this discussion about the great work of art. Thank you, and thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your contribution, Roland. Roland says he's really looking forward to hearing Lisa at Ocon. So, Lisa, what other points from the film you want to bring to our attention?
Okay, let's see. Well, there's one I can give that's just very short, because when I asked them for their top 10 complaints about it, one of the students said the music, and that was the end of the. I mean, the music I thought was very poor. I mean, I just recently rewatched La La Land, and that seemed like a musical masterpiece in comparison. The music in this version of Cyrano, I compared to what my 7-year-old daughter does when she's looking out the window on our drive home from school. She'll just kind of musically sing the things she sees with no rhyme and no meter to it. That's basically what the movie felt like. I'm
so tempted to start a discussion on La La Land because it's one of my favorite films, but we're going to leave it for another point.
Okay, well, I will sign up to have that discussion with you anytime you want, because it's fresh in my mind. And it's a film I love so much that it was almost hard for me to watch it again, because it's like I love it too much. It's like I have to keep it on the shelf and not experience it. So the last thing I'll say is I take offense at stealing the heart of a story and then doing a really poor job at it. I went a few years ago to see To Kill a Mockingbird on Broadway, and on its own terms, the play was, I can acknowledge the play was good. I think it was very politically motivated. I think the themes were offensively political, and not true to the original spirit of the novel. And they did their best to undercut the hero Atticus and glorify lesser characters. But anyway, the frustration was, well, you called this To Kill a Mockingbird. You're stealing the fame of it. You're stealing its name. You're stealing some important elements of its plot, and you haven't honored the spirit of it at all. And that's my feeling about this Cyrano also.
Right. So, and by the spirit, I assume you mean the heroic. I assume you mean the larger than life as you.
Idealism. Yeah.
Yes. And then the question becomes then, why do they make a film about this? So it's either that it's the easy thing to do, like, okay, what are famous plays? Or even worse, the director recognizes the brilliance and it's like, I can make something of it which it's going to give me some internal satisfaction. Well, I always love this. Now I'm going to bring it to screen. Also, I'm going to make millions and I'm going to pander to the sensitivities of the audience today. So, okay, so looks like you wouldn't recommend as a starting point for Cyrano, the 2021 film. So what would be the best way for someone to approach it? Obviously, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and to read with me and follow that. So you also recommend a particular translation there.
Yeah.
But if someone has the opportunity, would you recommend that they start with going to the theater and watch and seeing it, or watching the 1950 film, or any of the other adaptations, or go to the book, I assume, for a lack of a better...
My self-serving recommendation will be to start with the read with me, but it's because I do believe I understand the intention of the play, and I do believe I honor the true spirit of it. So, and I know it like the back of my hand at this point. So I'm able to not just hand you a play and say, read this, and it is meant to be seen on a stage, not to be read. It can be read and relished, as I have so many times. But I think just even having me read it aloud and give intonation to it, I'm no actor, I don't pretend to be, but I think I still give life to the words. And then to have me as a guide to point out what's important and to make integrations and to show how things fit together and to talk about things like the insecurity issue. I think that helps to elevate your experience and appreciation of it. And then in terms of cinematic versions, I've heard people say that the Derek Jacobi version, which is just a film of a stage, so it doesn't have any production values. It's just a film of him acting on stage. I know Leonard Peikoff really loves that one. I actually haven't seen that version myself. Of the other available ones, the Jose Ferrer version that you watched is my favorite, because I think he is how I imagine the character to be. He has the swagger, he has the joy, he has the kind of superiority and prowess, and I love that.
And also it's in the public domain since some years ago, so people can find it in various versions in YouTube as well. Yeah.
So okay.
So start with Read With Me. So for people who don't know, Read With Me is an app. If I remember well, it doesn't require any particular type of subscription. You download the app.
That's right. And now you can get it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I think there's all kinds of platforms that it's available on now, or you can download the app.
And the way it works is you've got two options. So the one option is you literally read with Lisa. So Lisa is reading and you can follow, or you can listen it as an audiobook if she has the rights for the book. So for example, White Knight was the book and you were actually reading it. Yeah. Or if you don't want to do this, or if Lisa hasn't got the rights for the text, you listen to the commentary. So you can read it yourself or listen to Lisa reading it. And then there's a separate, let's say, section in the podcast or the audiobook, depending how you want to see it, where there's the commentary. And I think you also have a Facebook group. I'm not in Facebook, but I've heard there's a Facebook group where so there's a backlog with past books you've done, but also you currently read books. So I suggest the best way to follow this is to register. How do I get these emails? Is it because I'm in Read With Me?
If you signed up for the app, then you'll be on the mailing list.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a mailing list with current projects and how they work. Also, Lisa is going to be with us in the UK next week. Is it Tuesday the event with Joanna?
Tuesday evening, I have an event with Joanna on lessons for schools from the pandemic. And Thursday, I'm giving a tour of Keats' house, which will include an introduction to some of his poetry and his life and make the experience of being in the house much more magical.
Right. So Joanna is Joanna Williams. Most of people who follow the show, they've probably seen her. And so one last thing. So many people I didn't know who Lisa was. I just happened to watch a Knock on Talk where you talk about poetry. So even if I didn't know the poets you were talking about, but the way you talk about art is you get so much into it that the audience also gets into it. So I will be honest and say I don't know any of the poems of this poet that you're referring, but I'm looking forward to coming to this tour, because even if you don't know the poem, it's a nice experiencing Lisa talking about these things. So thank you very much, Lisa. We're going to see you next week in London. So upcoming today, 10 p.m. UK time, we've got Cutting Edge with Lee Pearson. Special guest, doesn't get more special than that, Harry Binswanger. And the topic is affordances and perceptual inerrancy. Okay, sorry. There are two of the four words in the title. I don't even know what they mean. So if you want to find out more, follow Cutting Edge with Lee. Lisa, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Anything else you want to tell people about, any things that you're doing these days or that they should follow?
Just if you want to keep up to date on what I'm doing, sign up for the Read With Me app. You can get on my newsletter, and I have lots to say about the projects I'm working on now.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa, and see you next week in London. Thanks,
Okay,
everyone.
thank you.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.